Welcome back to When Bad Things Happen to Good People, a podcast about censorship and the arts. My name's Todd Sullivan. Joining me as always is Peter Raman.
Hello, hello.
And today we are finalizing our look at William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. Oh boy, this book.
Yeah.
Oh boy, this book.
Yeah. Well, just a note to everyone out there that Todd and I are in the same room this time. So
we're back
neither
in
of us are naked for this. So this is a clothed discussion about Naked Lunch.
So we are back in our studio here.
Yeah. Just living it up in Kamloops.
Living it up in Kamloops.
Yeah. So we're back together. we're in Kamloops.
We're in Kamloops.
And
my brain hurts.
Yeah, this book is... I know we've had some tough reads in the past, but I feel bad for some of these other books where I said this is a tough read. Yeah, like I would have given anything to like go back to Beloved and just reread that, because I mean, not that this book is like, you know, difficult in terms of the words or anything like that, but just to know what the heck is happening at any given moment, or where you're at, or who, like even which character is speaking.
Yeah,
it is
so we were
challenge.
We were talking yesterday when we were setting up the plan to record today, and you shared that, you know, this book had been a big struggle.
Yeah,
I said I completely agree, and I mentioned that, like, if it had not been for the fact that, you know, this podcast is what we're doing it for, I probably would have given up.
Yeah,
and since then I've been thinking about saying that, and I think. I'm reflecting back, I think maybe I wouldn't have. And I think the biggest issue that I have with this book isn't so much the difficulty in reading it, because I think in the last issue I talked about how this book is a bit of a vibe, right? Like when you're reading it, you may not know exactly what's going on, but it's captivating, it's creating feelings.
It's about the trip.
It's about the trip.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think the struggle I had is in trying to take what's on the page and convert that into something that we can talk about. And this really isn't a kind of book that lends itself to discussion.
Yeah, it's strange in the sense that, I mean, the Madonna book, essentially being a picture book, was almost easier to talk about.
So much easier.
You know? And yeah, like, the book does a great job of putting you into this insane world.
Yes.
Where, like, you almost feel after you read a chapter that you've hit the H, you know? Like,
yeah. But not just hit the H, but like the amount of sort of grime and ugliness.
Yeah,
and
you feel like it sticks to you.
Spit and slime and ectoplasm.
And
protoplasm,
exactly,
and all of these things. So yeah, I think that's where the challenge is in figuring out how to have a conversation about it.
Yeah. I agree with you in the sense that, like, when you did say, you know, you might not have finished it at first, I was kind of in that same boat of going, I might have, but also your point right now of that's what the book is about. And I think that if we were reading this, maybe not for the podcast, because when I don't know about you, but when I'm reading a book for the podcast, I'm looking at it in a bit of a different lens. Right, in terms of, how am I going to kind of take some notes here, and how are we going to discuss this and present it to, you know, to the listeners?
And what is there a bigger picture to discuss?
Exactly,
and
right?
Themes and metaphors. And...
Yeah. So when reading this book, I think outside of that, it would have been more fun.
Yeah,
in a sense.
A sense, yeah, as fun as that can be.
Not having to kind of read it with that in the back of your brain all the time of going, you know, how am I going to talk about this? Because I don't know what's going on. Instead of just going, let's just like be in this world and let you know, the narrator kind of take us on this crazy ride. Versus, oh no, what is I need to know what's happening so I can talk about it. And I think I probably would have had a much easier time with the book, I think, in that kind of frame or sense, and probably would have seen it to the end with maybe less qualms.
Yeah, right.
So, I get where you're coming from of going, if we look at what the point of the book is, more like than what we were trying to do with it, that it probably would have been a lot more of an easier read in a sense, right?
And for this half of the book too, I did end up absorbing it mostly through an audiobook, which helped. I was able to kind of like sit back and let it kind of wash over me in a way, sort of almost more passive than
let the ectoplasm,
let the ectoplasm wash over you. I did kind of follow along on the page as well. But I think for me, the optimum way that I would have sort of preferred to experience this book was maybe like lying on a sofa, earbuds in, eyes closed, and just sort of bathe in the experience of this book for a while.
I'm very curious what the movie. Have you seen the movie?
I have seen the movie.
Yeah.
I would love it if we could try to watch the movie before we do the live episode.
Yeah.
There is a version of it available on archive.org, which was surprising. It's got subtitles of some kind on it, but the actual audio is in English.
Okay.
My memory of the movie is that it's more about Burroughs' life as a writer and as an addict.
Okay.
And it's about the act of creating.
Like specifically this book?
Specifically this book, but also
okay.
creating in general.
Okay.
There are instances in the book where some of the stories from the book end up in the film as they're being told by either someone to the character of Bill Lee or by Bill Lee to somebody else. So like you have the story of the guy who taught his asshole to talk.
That was a fun
one. And there's, a few other ones. There's, characters you recognize, like Dr. Benway shows up, and he's played by Roy Scheider.
Wow.
So like, but it's very not a direct adaptation.
Okay.
And that was sort of expected because this book had long been considered to be impossible to adapt as a direct adaptation.
Yeah. Without a lot of kind of structural work.
And it's funny because I did really enjoy the film, and it's been a number of years since I watched it. I have a Criterion Collection copy of the DVD.
Oh,
I would
wow.
like to get a 4K now. But I'd love to see it again, having read the book and sort of catch those things. Like mugwumps are actual things in it that have their own very interesting kind of design, and so it blurs the lines, and it's.
Well, let's try and do it.
I would love to.
Well, I mean, we still got a few movies to watch, but let's try and get that in before the live episode.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are picking up with the chapter "Ordinary Men and Women."
Yeah.
And I got my notes here.
So I feel like, and I can't recall exactly, but there was talk of the party, or a little bit, I think, a bit earlier in the book,
like a political party.
Yeah. In Interzone, and this is the first kind of chapter, I think, that's kind of devoted to them, or where we see them,
right?
Just being jerks, essentially.
Yeah. Well, this chapter opens with the luncheon of the Nationalist Party, and they're on a balcony overlooking the market.
Yeah.
As they smoke cigars and they drink scotch. These are sort of, in my mind, these are portrayed as sort of like the upper echelon of the political people in Tangier or in Interzone, wherever.
Yeah. I mean, you have the actual party leader and his lieutenants, and this is the people that make it tick. And there's the whole street boy thing. Which
so I think they start by looking out. They're looking out over the city, and the party leader points out that the ordinary men and women below with their ordinary lives, he's like, that's what we need.
To reinvigorate the party or something like that, right? Is his implication.
And then we have a street boy that climbs up onto the balcony and is like, hey guys, what's going on? Then they talk about the French for a while.
Yeah, in not a good way.
The kid says he hates everyone, says it's metabolic, and that Benway is making a serum for him. And then they all disparage Benway.
Mm-hmm. And they're concerned. They want to look into that serum.
Yes. And then I think
and that's the last we ever hear about the party in investigating the serum.
Yeah. And I think from here too, it veers off into little mini stories of the people on the street below, right?
Yeah.
So I have American housewife complains about her appliances snapping at her and getting under her dress.
Yeah.
And this is this weird thing. Like she's got all these appliances that are doing all these different things, and some of them are like vaguely sexual, I think. And
I think most are.
yeah, probably. And then we have a salesman discussing some great inventions, and I had a portion of the book I wanted to read here. So let me just find this. Okay, here we go.
The octopus kit?
Yes, exactly. It was KE put out the octopus kit for massage parlors, barbershops, and Turkish baths with which you can administer a high colonic, an unethical massage, a shampoo whilst cutting the client's toenails and removing his blackheads. And the MD's can-do kit for busy practitioners will take out your appendix, tuck in a hernia, pull a wisdom's tooth, ectomize your piles, and circumcise you. Like, man, that thing does everything.
It's a pretty They don't tell us the cost, but that's probably a pricey unit.
Yep. And as we go through this chapter, I think there's a couple of the anecdotes that I did not make a note of, and so if you have notes about any of those,
I'm just kind of looking through notes, and yeah, I mean, my original note was just a lot of little vignettes.
Yeah, fair enough.
So
fair enough.
As far as specific ones that stick out, I don't really have anything more to add. I think we've got the gist of. We see this often throughout the book. Is there's these little asides. Sometimes they're very little in terms of like a page or what have you. Sometimes they tend to drag on, and you kind of never know what you're going to get. Some of them are memorable. Some of them are, well, that was an interesting little trip.
Yep. Yeah. They have a male hustler complains about his clientele.
Yeah.
And then one guy climaxes and turns into some kind of crab.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of like the metamorphosis and the like people absorbing each other or replicating, or, you know, that is stuff that in the book, talking about like how would you make this into a movie, or
yes,
you know, like it's just so strange and odd and weird and tough to visualize, you know, in any realistic way, and it keeps happening throughout the book.
Yep.
And it's tough to picture it, you know, in terms of like what that would really look like from someone drugged up and like actually like thinking they're seeing this, versus like what was really happening while they were seeing this, you know, like there's just a lot of tough kind of contextualization here to try and really figure out, you know, what may or may not have been actually happening, and what you're seeing from like this drug trip kind of you know, view, and yeah, like it's part of the challenge, I think.
Yep. And here I have another thing I'd like to read. The county clerk. So there I was, sitting in front of Jed's store over in Cuntlick, my Peter standing straight as a jack pine under my Levi's, just a pulsing in the sun. Well, old Doc Scranton walks by, a good old boy too. There's not a finer man in this valley than Doc Scranton. He's got a prolapsed asshole, and when he wants to get screwed, he'll pass you his ass on 3 feet of intestine. If he's a mind to it, he can drop out a piece of gut, reaches from his office, clear over to Roy's beer place, and it go feeling around looking for a Peter, just a feeling around like a blind worm. So old Doc Scranton sees my Peter, and he stops like a pointing dog, and he says to me, "Luke, I can take your pulse from here." Yeah, sure.
Just classics like that.
Classics
right?
like that. Then we have a sword fight with hog castrators, whatever that means. An elegant gay man comes to New York, is taken up by old women, and begins to make jewelry. I remember this story. He starts to like gamble on the horses. He loses all of his money. And then starts gambling away the gems that he's been using on the jewelry. Then all the old women realize that there's fake gems in the jewelry, so they have him arrested. In jail, he meets and falls in love with a hustler, and they move in together. And then later, once they're out of prison, one of the ladies, Lucy, my handwriting is terrible, Lucy Bradgenfink, maybe, comes to offer them a future. Instead, they eat her cunt Saigont cooked in Kotex papillon.
Yeah, there's a few instances in the book where they mention eating like the cooked cunt
genitals
Kotex combo.
Yeah,
you know, which it's a weird one.
Kotex comes up a lot, which is
I mean, it must have been killing it as a brand back in the day.
It was probably the primary brand. Next little bit, we have Benway and Schaefer discussing medicine. Benway tells the story of a man who taught his asshole to talk, which is a fun story.
Yeah, that one's kind of a bit of a neat one. How, like he was a ventriloquist or something like that. It's kind of like a party trick, and then it just spirals from there, where he, the asshole eventually like won't shut up. So if he's walking down the street or whatever, his asshole's talking, and then it's.
And then eventually the asshole learns to eat.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't need you anymore. I can eat and I can shit all by myself.
Yeah.
And so every time the guy wakes up in the morning, he's got this weird slime covering his mouth as his body is trying to and eventually
it's like proto skin.
His mouth does eventually end up kind of covered up. Yeah. And unfortunately the eyes have to remain because
that was the one
figured
the
out
one
how to
thing,
replace those things.
The one thing the asshole kept. But yeah, kind of like, and I think it says the asshole like locked him out of his own body.
Yep.
You know. So
he was just a brain inside there, can't control anything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Eyes and a talking asshole. Until eventually the brain just shut off and the whole thing fell apart. Yeah.
Then I have the huntsmen have gathered for the hunt breakfast.
Yeah, I didn't really understand this little thing. It just was like a weird hunt party thing.
And there's lots of drinks coming out of baboon cocks and snacks coming out of baboon asses.
Yeah. Now, this was another recurring theme in the book of like fountains or things where if you grab the ball, champagne or some kind of drink would come out the cock.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think I've ever seen like a keg or something or a fountain or something like that where like you twist the balls to
be pretty cool though.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not sure why you don't see more of that. Like it comes up several times in the book.
Probably costly.
Yeah, that's true.
Cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
Lots of baboon references too.
Yeah.
Pink-assed, red-assed baboons.
Yeah. Blue-assed, purple-assed.
Yeah.
All colored-assed baboons.
So many colors.
Who, I think at some point, maybe near the end of the book, we find out they're like protected in Interzone City.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah. There was a little snippet or something about they're protected, and that's why they're there and running amok because people can't do anything. They're protected.
Well, if I could twist their balls and get champagne out of their dicks, I'd keep them protected too, man. That's a rare species.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Dr. Berger's Mental Health Hour.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a great title. And in this chapter, it seems like there's some people trying to film something like a commercial. Their original subject who's delivering the lines is deemed unsuitable, so they send him out. And they send him, I don't remember where, but it sounded like very kind of permanent wherever they're sending him to. Like,
yeah.
Then they bring in the cured homosexual who does deliver the lines, but it's still not quite right.
Yeah, and it's just like, they're just kind of like, oh, bring in the next whatever.
Yeah, they start arguing over what's missing and what they need. And somebody suggests maybe a new writer. And then I think that's all I have from them.
They find a cured writer, but he can't talk because he has discovered Buddhism or something.
Right. I have something about the party leader stating that they need a leader for their planned riots.
Mm-hmm. Now, later in the book as well, when we find out a little bit more about Islam Inc., we find out that all their meetings turn into crazy riots as well. So it seems like Interzone is quite the place for riots.
It's tumultuous.
Yeah, and the fact that they need to like plan out these riots, at least from the party standpoint, is a little interesting. But
yeah, so this riot does occur at the end of this chapter, during which people sort of escape the streets and all the businesses they roll down their shutters and they close up, and then eventually the police come in and just beat everyone until they go home.
Yeah, and that's probably a Tuesday or something.
Probably a Tuesday. Islam Incorporated and the Parties of Interzone is the next chapter.
Yeah. So this one is kind of like introducing the characters and the agents of this Islam Inc. Who none of like the main agents seem to be Arabic.
Although there are references to Arabs throughout.
Yeah. Well, they tend to be, I guess, the lower level people. And none of the upper echelon ever go to the meetings because they turn into crazy riots.
Fair enough.
But yeah, this is where we meet, I think in a little more detail, some of the characters. So there's this AJ guy.
Who's the financier.
Yeah, and he's a bit of a wild crazy guy.
I also have in my very first sentence here, my very first note, AJ may be an agent of giant insects from another galaxy.
Yeah.
I guess we're not sure. His cover story is as a practical joker responsible for an orgy at the U.S. Embassy where he dosed the punch.
Yeah. With some kind of weird plant.
The Ant Fluoride Society losing their teeth. Or is it the
Anti-Fluoride
Society losing their teeth. And releasing the aphrodisiac insect Zicutl into the New York Metropolitan Opera.
Yeah, and the restaurant where he pisses off the chef. And
yes,
and I sets 100 wild hogs on him.
Yes, I want to read that section too.
Okay,
because to give a little bit of context for why this particular section tickled me. I'm famously not a fan of ketchup. I think ketchup is like the lowest class of condiment.
I'm not a fan of it either. No.
And I feel like probably most chefs are like the same way. Like if you were to go into a fancy restaurant,
unless it's some like, custom, fancy ketchup,
like
right,
a peppered, blueberry
if they've
ketchup
created it,
but like just a Heinz ketchup kind of thing. If you go into a restaurant and order like a well done steak with some ketchup on the side, I feel like this is the way they would react.
Yeah.
AJ once reserved a table a year in advance, chez Robert, where a huge icy gourmet broods over the greatest cuisine in the world. So baneful and derogatory is his gaze that many a client under that withering blast has rolled on the floor and pissed all over himself in convulsive attempts to ingratiate. So AJ arrives with 6 Bolivian Indians who chew coca leaves between courses, and when Robert, in all his gourmet majesty, bears down the table, AJ looks up and yells, "Hey boy, bring me some ketchup." Alternative, AJ whips out a bottle of ketchup and douses the hot cuisine. 30 gourmets stop chewing at once. You could have heard a souffle drop. As for Robert, he lets out a bellow of rage like a wounded elephant, runs to the kitchen and arms himself with a meat cleaver. The sommelier snarls hideously, his face turning a strange iridescent purple. He breaks off a bottle of Brut Champagne, 26. Pierre, the head waiter, snatches up a boning knife. All 3 chase AJ through the restaurant with mangled, inhuman screams of rage. Tables overturn. Vintage wines and matchless food crash to the floor. Cries of "Lynch him!" ring through the air. An elderly gourmet with the insane bloodshot eyes of a mandrill is fashioning a hangman's knot with a red velvet curtain cord. Seeing himself cornered and in imminent danger of dismemberment at least, AJ plays his trump card. He throws back his head and lets out a hog call. And 100 famished hogs he had stationed nearby rush into the restaurant, slopping the hot cuisine like a great tree. Like a great tree, Robert falls to the floor in a stroke where he is eaten by the hogs. Poor bastards don't know enough to appreciate him, says AJ.
that was a fun little.
Yeah, I loved that.
Yeah, I mean the neat thing about AJ and some of the other folks here is their sections seem to make a little bit of sense.
Yeah,
right? Like they're wild stories, but they're more like less drug trippy and more just kind of like a wild story.
Yeah, and those are definitely my favorite parts of the book, are the ones that sort of they're these fun little anecdotes and less sort of focused on the drug-addled descriptions of what's going on in Interzone and these other things. I don't know if you have any other notes from that chapter. I jump ahead.
There's a few other people, right? So we meet Hassan, Clem and Jody, like the Ergut brothers or whatever. They're Russian agents. And then, everyone involved in Islam Inc. has different goals. And there's like different types of agents. There's different groups.
Yeah, well, this gets into Manhattan Serenade, where we learn about there's the liquefaction party, the senders, the divisionists, and the factualists, if that's what you're referring to.
That's kind of the end of this chapter, I think, where we hear more about them after, but we were told of them that there's these different groups within Islam Inc.
Yeah.
These are the different parties. And like these are some interesting, like the senders and the liquefactionists and the divisionists, the replicating guys. Like then it starts to get a little more wild here.
Yeah,
with these,
it does.
Because
Because we've got the liquefaction party is entirely composed of dupes, absorbing each other until only one remains. Mm-hmm. So I guess they're like duplicates of each other.
Yeah.
And then they schlup themselves together. I'm going to use schlup a lot because that word,
that's a good
Burroughs
word,
loved that word. And then there's the divisionists. They cut off tiny bits of themselves and grow exact replicas.
Mm-hmm. Except you don't want to have exact replicas, right? They always try and disguise them because too many exact replicas in one spot is not good. It's wild.
I don't have any notes on what the senders are.
The senders were the telepathic guys.
Okay.
So yeah, like they're basically always sending telepathic thoughts, but senders can't be receivers, so they're just always sending things to other people until they've got nothing left, and it's just all about control.
Right.
Yeah, it's a weird one because like the sending thing seems like everyone just eventually, uses up every bit of emotion that they have, and then they're a husk of a person. And like, why would you even want to be a sender? It doesn't make any sense.
No. And then the factualists are apparently anti-liquefactionists, anti-divisionists, and anti-sender.
That's right. Sounds like a good company to work for, this Islamic.
Yeah. The county clerk.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, county clerk is another weird one where, it's the old courthouse, right? And there's the old guy there, the county clerk.
Yeah.
He's telling all sorts of weird stories. And then, like, the building itself is in ruins, but it seems like a giant place. But
it's also, like, the purpose of this is the civil cases are meant to be tried there, but the proceedings are dragged out to the point that most contestants either die or abandon litigation.
Yeah.
So it feels very much almost like a satire of
the actual legal
system. Yeah. And there's a bit where Lee has to file for an immediate affidavit that he is suffering from the bubonic plague. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, he'll be kicked out of his apartment.
Yeah.
Not sure why.
He's got all this weird paperwork and how does he, in the end, he pulls out his Razorback card or something like that. And
I have no note at all on how that's resolved.
And the county clerk guy doesn't believe him, but he says something about the Jews, and then he's like, "Oh, you're a Razorback,
you're
whatever that even means." And then he's going to process his paperwork. Yeah, it was just that was a weird one, Yeah, very, very in the kind of sense of. You can't imagine any of what's described as very realistic. Like the courthouse, like 200 assistants being killed in a collapse of one small wing of the courthouse building.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, like what is going on here? Like they're still searching 20 years later for one file. Yeah, I mean, maybe it is a real allegory of the current system.
Right, exactly. In the chapter called Interzone, we meet Arachnid.
Yeah.
Who is the only native of the zone who is neither queer or available. He is Andrew Keefe's chauffeur.
Yeah. Now, I think, was he mentioned as one of the agents in the other chapter?
Andrew Keefe?
Yeah, I didn't remember. But
I don't remember.
They say that he's an agent, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think most people become agents at one point or another.
Mm-hmm. But he's also, this chauffeur is so ugly that it's...
Yeah, that's right.
Like one of the ugliest people at Interzone or something like that.
Yeah, well, that's why, he's not available, presumably. We have a bit about Interzone imports in Unlimited, which is made up of Marvy and Leaf the Unlucky, who are working on a deal that will get them a boatload of KY made from whale dreck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, KY was really popular throughout this book.
KY, very popular, probably a vital piece of inventory for queers in the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah. But made from whale dreck.
That sounds
probably not going to smell good. I think even in this chapter, there's a bit about where some guy went down to the docks to check on this transaction and did not smell very good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then so the whole this is more of this business transaction, right? So there's a check eventually that they get, and the check is made out for 24 Turkish whatevers. And
Right,
it's
yeah.
like, I mean, you wonder what it really is, right? And
Yeah.
the check is held in escrow for 11 months or something, and they're drinking away the time by showing a photo of the check, like to prove that he's got the money, and
Or will have one day,
Will
yeah.
have, yeah.
Do they ever get the money? I don't remember how that chapter ends up.
I don't think
think
it
so.
says no, because we run into the expediter, who's upset that he hasn't gotten paid, and then I'm not sure if that resolves or not, but there was some discussion there of like, hey, I'll have the money, but
Yeah.
I think they do say that he maybe spent it all already or something, like
Right.
that. So.
Next, we have the examination. Carl Peterson finds a card requesting he report for a 10 o'clock appointment with Dr. Benway. Benway.
We do get a lot of Dr. Benway.
We do get a
in
lot of
this
Dr.
book,
Benway.
yeah.
Benway tells a long story about the disease of sexual deviation.
Mm-hmm.
Carl eventually asks why he's being told all this, and it's because they want to test him for deviation.
Mm-hmm.
Carl denies anything other than attraction to women, and he's asked to leave a semen sample, and then he goes about his business. I think he gets another card requesting his return.
Yeah, he comes back at some other point, yeah.
At which point he is... At first he's told that like everything's fine.
Yeah.
But then Benway begins to sort of question him about his sexual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like when you were in
It's also implied, I think, that Benway can somehow read his thoughts or like see into his mind.
Maybe.
Because at the end of this chapter, he's kind of like having this dream internally about a scenario or whatever, and Benway's like, aha. It's just a weird examination.
Well, what I remember is, Benway is basically asking him questions that lead him down this path of like, when you were in the military, didn't you, just to sort of keep yourself company, you had some pinup girls.
Yeah.
You recognize any of these pinup girls from the ones that you kept? Did you know that some of these pinup girls were men in drag?
Yeah.
And did you ever...
Well, and he's like, but you picked the right one. The one you picked wasn't one that was in drag.
Yeah,
like,
but then,
just kind of like goading him on, right?
Eventually, Carl does admit that, maybe now and then, when necessary, he had engaged in sexual activities with a man.
Well, he was in a foreign country.
He was in a foreign country,
right?
for sure.
Yeah. Which Dr. Benway is like, well, that's, that was economic. That was a necessity,
Yes.
right? So those ones don't count,
But,
right?
but I think there is a nefariousness to this conversation because it seems pretty clear that Benway
is out to get him.
Yeah. And he's just luring him down this path. And the
Yeah.
whole point of the whole, like, oh, no, that's fine, is just to keep him calm and continuing to answer questions. Because at the end of it, Carl is like, I'm not putting up with this. I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
And then he can't find his way out because the room just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Have you seen Pantapon Rose?
Yeah.
This one I took no notes on because I couldn't figure out what was happening, and my notes basically, I went to the to that site that we were drawing wisdom from last time, and essentially what it says is that this is someone moving through the city, trying to acquire drugs, and these are the images he sees, and they're disjointed and sinister. It's worth noting, I wouldn't have known this. Pantapon is a brand name for opium. Didn't realize opium had brand names.
Yeah.
But now
interesting.
now you know. Pantapon.
Wow. Pantapon.
For all your opium needs.
Wow.
Coke Bugs is up next.
Yeah. Coke Bugs was also another weird chapter.
Weird, but relatively easy to follow, I felt.
Yeah.
We have the sailor is hanging out at a cafe, having a coffee. A young boy comes in. Lots of young boys here in the Interzone as well.
Yeah.
Comes like in and sits at the bar. He's bitten by something, and the bartender says it's a Coke bug.
Mm-hmm. What is a Coke bug? Like a bed bug or what? Like we don't really know.
I don't know. I assumed it maybe comes out of cocaine.
Oh,
is related to cocaine in somehow.
Mm-hmm. At first, I thought it was like a bug that feeds off of cocaine.
Right, that could be too.
That might
biting
be too. People.
Yeah, because it's trying to draw the cocaine out of their system. Maybe.
Yeah.
Right. It's like
senses the
a
cocaine.
mosquito trying to draw cocaine. The sailor calls the boy over to his table and offers him junk in exchange for his time.
Mm-hmm.
which the boy doesn't really understand.
Yeah, and this happens. I think there's another spot in the book where this, I think, presumably the same sailor.
This story continues into the next chapter.
Oh, is it when they go to the little apartment or whatever? Yeah. Okay.
The next chapter, the exterminator does a good job. We follow.
Okay. Yeah.
Sailor.
So this is the sailor's hooking the boy up.
Yeah, Sailor and the boy go up to his room where he's got like 100% pure heroin. Mm-hmm. Sailor says he wants time from the boy. Boy doesn't really understand. And the sailor's like, 5 minutes here, an hour there, 2, 4, 8. He offers him 5 years apiece. Nobody gives a better deal on the street. Now, what this means, I'm not sure of. Is he asking for companionship?
I felt like it was kind of more sexually motivated. Like, give me your time to, sexually gratify me as the sailor kind of thing. The whole like 5 years apiece, like I guess the units of measure and compensation here are kind of confusing, but
sure.
But like essentially, I mean, he's taken advantage of this young boy's addiction to like get some kind of sex slave or whatever the actual arrangement is. And then we never really hear from the sailor or the boy again in the book. So. Yeah.
But the boy does agree to the arrangement.
Yeah, he's kind of like, whatever. Like, give me the junk,
And then at the very end, there's a reference to the exterminator. And I'm not sure if that's supposed to be the boy or sailor. But somebody steps in and says that they're the exterminator who got rid of the bugs and rats. But they're now looking to exterminate defecting agents.
Mm-hmm. Which is very ominous, especially since we've learned about all these different agents of Islam Inc. And then that never really goes anywhere either.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just lots of interesting things kind of just happening and popping up. But
it feels very much like kind of like just an overshadowing kind of paranoia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That there's agents, and some are defecting, and some are with them, and some are with us.
That's right, yeah.
Next chapter is the algebra of need, which, again, I had no means of figuring out. But according to the website that I went to, Fats Terminal has learned the algebra of need, which I think Burroughs later in the some of the later bits talks about as the eternal calculation that you do as an addict to figure out what you're willing to do, how far you're willing to go
to survive,
and to feed your addiction. As Fats Terminal serves a man the black meat, his consciousness expands until he sees all the depraved acts occurring in the city. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that chapter.
Was that the one where it ends with kind of like, and the universe exploded outward or something like that?
Might have been, yeah.
And again, like, just to go back and comment on the writing style here, like, each little snippet of whatever's happening, as maybe nonsensical or difficult to follow as it is, they're insanely well written.
Absolutely.
Like every sentence is just this little masterpiece, but oftentimes it doesn't connect to the sentence before or after.
Yeah.
And it's so just strange and wonderful in a way.
But disjointed.
But so disjointed. Like, it really, I think if it was poorly written or, didn't have that flourish or style, that it wouldn't hit as a book, right? Like to really present this junky drug trip, wild, crazy fantasy world. I think that's one of the ingredients that like really has to be present. Is
I agree.
Every little snippet, no matter how disjointed, has to be kind of perfect in its own way. And like, there's some really, really interesting stuff in here. I know you've read a few kind of passages that were maybe a bit more tame, but sure. Like there's some, and some of it is beautiful and some of it is gross and dirty and, kind of out there, but it's all like masterful.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting. And I think that's one of the things that really helps, make it worth reading, is just how perfect some of the stuff is, right? In terms of just like, wow, like that's an amazing kind of set of words.
Yeah.
How who would ever thought to kind of put that together? and then you read the next sentence and you're like, well, that it didn't connect, but
Right.
like, well, that was just wonderful, right? So yeah, I just wanted to kind of comment on that, because some of this at the end of this chapter about like consciousness and the universe exploding and that kind of stuff, like it's extremely well written, but yeah, like sometimes it doesn't go anywhere, or it's very brief, and it's just it makes it, when we talk about the feel and the vibe of the book, it really helps bring that across.
Well, and it's interesting too that you talk about like these fragments of things that are like really evocative on their own, but maybe don't necessarily connect well to the things in front or after them. Because from here, Burroughs would go on to experiment with the cut-up method, which is like actually chopping up portions and words and things like that and rearranging them so that what you end up with is like this chaotic
Alphabet soup kind of.
It's not known. I think I read that possibly he may have already started dabbling in it in the very final chapter of this, because it does get very, very unjointed by the end.
Yeah.
But most of this, the vast majority of this, would not have been written this way. Next chapter is Hauser and O'Brien. I really enjoyed this chapter.
This, for me, this was the chapter that felt the most coherent
This
in
is
the whole book.
The longest series of coherent storytelling in this entire
This was
book.
like an actual, like,
you could print this
event.
as a short story almost on its own.
Yeah, and realistically, in my mind, this one chapter kind of tied up the whole book.
In a way,
like this for me, I thought, well, this is the end, like, because it kind of resolved like the story of Lee in the book, and being on the run versus like,
because it starts with him kind of escaping New York.
Yeah,
and then this. Well, let's just talk about what happens in this chapter. Hauser and O'Brien are a couple of cops that are sent to bring in Bill. And they're tasked with also bringing in like all of his books, all of his writing, all of his notes.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be an easy job.
It's supposed to be an easy job.
He's Bill Lee. He's kind of a known junkie. These cops know of him. They're like, all right, we'll go pick him up.
So they get to his apartment just as he's about to shoot himself up. And he's like,
hey, literally tying up his arms as they come in. Yeah.
And he's like, you guys mind if I just finish this up? There's like more than enough heroin on the table for evidence.
Yeah.
And they're like, we really can't let you do that. Yeah. But he knows they're also sort of implying like make a deal.
Yeah.
And so he offers to give up a dealer named Marty.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, all right. If you can really deliver Marty to us, then we'll turn it back for a second and do your thing. But after he takes the shot, he fills his syringe up with alcohol and sprays the alcohol into the eyes of Hauser.
Yeah. Now, the one thing is, the reason I think he wanted to get this shot in is for him, he's like shaking and like almost unable to operate. Yeah. But once he gets the junk in him, then he's like Jason Bourne almost, right?
Yeah.
Like
he's got a plan.
He's switched on. He's got a plan, and he can function
there's
at kind of a higher level. Almost.
There's a touch of foreshadowing when he's thinking about his suitcase. If they open the suitcase now, I'm screwed, kind of a thing. When he blinds Hauser with the alcohol, he goes,
which he does this whole move of like sweeping it across his eyes somehow, and like
sort of spraying.
He kind of like, I pictured this scene as like he's like this kind of pathetic junkie shivering on the couch, like needing this hit, and then all of a sudden
he's John Wick.
He's like Jason Bourne basically, right? Like doing all these moves, and he gets to his suitcase and grabs his gun, and
pulls out a gun,
and the first cop that he shoots, Hauser, right? Like he somehow like he's like, I noticed his bulletproof vest was up a couple inches.
Shoots him twice in the stomach
and shoots him right there, like very like kind of this secret agent type assassin character, very Jason Bourne, right? And like dead eyes the other guy in the head.
O'Brien right in the head.
Yeah, like it's just like, whoa, who turned this guy on?
He gathers up all of his writing. Managed to escape out into the streets. He realizes he's got to skip town.
Yeah, he's like, I got to get out of here.
So he needs to score some H, so he's like good for a while.
Yeah, he's got to get a big score here.
He finds Nick, who's a dealer, who can hook him up if they go uptown. So they get in a taxi, they go uptown. Bill goes into a coffee shop while Nick goes and tries to source the drugs. Nick comes back with a thumbs up or a wink or whatever. And they go back into a taxi to get like the trade-off off the street.
Yeah, don't give it to me here, man.
Yeah. Bill stays the night in a bathhouse. And the next morning he gets up in the morning.
Well, there's something about like the bathhouse and pretending to be queer is a good like kind of disguise or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. That part didn't make as much sense, but
that's interesting because that does actually, I feel like it comes up a bit more in the movie, that whole idea of being queer as a disguise. And I wonder whether or not, I know in the movie, I shouldn't say I know, it's been a while since I watched it, but I feel like in the movie it was an implication that there was a denial at a period of time with Burroughs that he didn't want to acknowledge his queerness. And so saying he was staying in the bathhouse because it was a good disguise is hiding the fact that he was staying there because he was legitimately queer, right?
Okay.
So next morning he gets the paper and he phones the police asking to talk to Hauser or O'Brien.
Yeah.
And they say there's nobody there by that name.
Yeah, there's no one in the department.
Yep.
Like, what are you talking? And they're, who are you? Like, what's going on?
And they offer to connect him with some other guy named Alcibiades.
Yeah.
And he's just like, no, thank you. And that's it.
Well, and he hangs up and he basically realizes that he's free and clear, right? He's like, well, these guys don't exist. Like something's happened. There's been some kind of shift, in the universe.
I can get out of here.
I'm good to go. Like I am free and clear. And we have this kind of like, this is, he's resolved this somehow, right?
Yeah.
And he's scored all this junk. He's in the clear. Does he skip town or not? What were the papers? We don't really know, but it's kind of,
well, presumably the papers were the notes that would become
this book.
Yeah. Why they were trying to get them.
Yeah.
Whether
because
or not
they would have information on all these drugs.
Yeah. And again,
and Islam Inc.
It's the agents who are trying to, stop the truth from getting out.
That's right. Yeah.
Then we finally get to the atrophied preface.
Oh man.
Subtitled "Wouldn't You?"
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what was going on in this. Like again, going back to what we were talking about of like the little snippets of brilliant kind of phrasing that don't connect to anything. This chapter was full of that.
Yeah,
there's also, I mean, I also thought in a lot of instances there were just callbacks to like parts in the book. Like there's a lot of, I think we hear about the bloody Kotex thing in here again, and like stuff from the first part of the book, and it's all just in little snippets, right, that kind of harken you back to a particular point, and then there's kind of new stuff, but it's all very disjointed. So this to me, as tough as it was to understand what the hell is going on, it sure does leave you feeling like you just had a drug trip, because it was wild.
I think a lot of this chapter is about the process of writing this book, and about what he was maybe trying to accomplish. I feel like weirdly, it almost should have been at the beginning, because I think in a lot of ways it does talk about the best way to kind of understand it. There was one portion in here that I highlighted to read because I thought it really spoke to almost how this book works. There is only one thing a writer can write about: what is in front of his senses at the moment of writing. I am a recording instrument. I do not presume to impose story, plot, continuity. Insofar as I succeed in direct recording of certain areas of psychic process, I may have limited function. I am not an entertainer. And I think, that really speaks to what is going on in this book. He's communicating what he's experiencing, what is in front of his senses, and admittedly those senses are kind of fucky given, the drugs that he's been taking. He was apparently addicted to heroin for 15 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Before getting clean. And, he talked about I read a little bit into some of the post section here, where stuff about the writing of the book.
Oh, okay.
And he talks about how by the time he was like deeply lost into his addiction, he was literally not leaving his apartment. He was literally not doing any other thing other than like getting high and staring at his foot for 8 hours at a time. People wouldn't visit him anymore because there was nobody there really to visit. And so I think a lot of this book is just him, whether it's describing what's happening in the world outside, whether it's describing what's happening in the world inside of his head, some weird combination of the two things in a fantasy realm. But yeah. And then the additional bit that I got from, the interpretive website, is that he talks about, towards the end of the preface, he talks about how he's going to unlock his word hoard. And following that, the book becomes even more disjointed as these words just become kind of chaotically strung together.
Yeah, it's like one sentence from either something that you've already maybe heard in the book, but it's one after another, just jumping all over the place.
Yeah. And then the final chapter, which is about a page, and it's just called Quick, is just more of that word jumble, and more like some things, they look like maybe the first line from a story. Some of them might be references to other things. The very last line is a reference to earlier. It was this know something Clom Fly Day.
Yeah, which is like, what even was that, right?
I don't know. I mean, maybe a reference to cycles.
Was it in the book earlier?
Yep.
Oh.
It was something that I think there were Chinese dealers. That was meant to be a Chinese accent, I think. Where there's something it's not available. No glot. Yeah. No got come Friday. No glot Clom Friday.
Okay.
It came up earlier in the book.
Okay.
Again, I don't know for sure what what it means,
right.
but that's the end.
Yeah. Tangier,
1959. I was originally going to suggest that we go through some of the deleted sections, but nope, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, when I first started reading the book, I kind of I got into one, and it was just kind of more of the same, like alternate versions of an already fucky chapter.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I've got enough going on just trying to get through.
If someone wants to deep dive on this book, it's there, and maybe I'll go through them at some point later. But
I might skim some before the live episode.
Yeah.
Just to kind of.
If anything, I'd like to read more of the. I don't remember what
the process of how he wrote the book.
There's some good stuff in there talking about a deposition testimony concerning a sickness. Is Burroughs talking about his addiction and coming out of his addiction? Letter from a master addict to dangerous drugs. I skimmed that. It was really interesting, because he's basically talking about his own experiences with drugs and what he thought about each different drug, whether it's morphine, heroin, cocaine, marijuana. He's tried them all.
Yeah, he's been around the block.
And then the editor's note talks a little bit about the construction of the book, which I think is maybe the best way to talk about it, because it feels like this wasn't a book that was necessarily written in the conventional way.
No.
It was notes that he was essentially taking while he was high as fuck.
Yeah.
And then kind of discovering them again when he came out of it, and then kind of piecing them together. So it's a book that was almost edited more than it was written, compiled. I don't know how you want to word it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I saw, I can't remember, what place I saw this. One of the kind of note apps. The chapters, I guess, as they are, like the order was kind of completely haphazard. He kind of reordered everything right before sending it for publication. So yeah, as far as how it was written, there wasn't. We talked about the lack of continuity or anything like that. But yeah, it was kind of a lot more haphazard in terms of how everything flows together from one chapter to the next in the book. And it was, I don't know if it was a whim or if there is some kind of timeline. There almost is, in a sense, in a few places in the book, kind of a bit of a timeline.
In the sense of like the beginning and the Hauser and O'Brien chapters are kind of like bookends. And there are a few instances where one chapter does kind of connect to another.
That's right. Yeah.
But other than that, it does seem very haphazard. And there is a reference, in the notes section afterwards where Burroughs sort of says that like you can essentially cut into this book at any point.
Yeah.
It's not a linear narrative. And I mean, again, that's part of what makes it challenging to talk about.
Yeah.
Because we're used to talking about. I feel like talking just implies that we have to talk in a linear fashion. Like you just like it's almost like the best way to discuss this book is like through interpretive dance.
Kind of,
like
yeah.
It feels like
a perverse slideshow or something of just these random images that are fantastically odd and not connected to each other in any sequence. Like it's. I mean, we've talked about it a few different times here that it really is, essentially reading it is like you're on a drug trip.
Yeah,
like it's just that all over the place and wild, and the imaging is insane in some points and normal in others, and all over the place in every stop in between, and brilliant in the sense that. Up until this book, I don't think there had anything ever really been written in that way.
No, and I can definitely understand why, if you were sort of a young person in like the, late 50s, early 60s, maybe in the counterculture movement, coming across something like this, having it be eye-opening. Absolutely eye-opening as far as the potential for what could be accomplished through literature.
Yeah.
This probably would be unlike anything that had been experienced before. There's a quote I really like, and I don't know where it originates, but the quote is, "Writing about music is like dancing about architecture."
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically, this idea that to try to like take something like music and water it down to something you can explain with words makes as much sense as to describe architecture through dance.
Yeah.
And that's very much how I feel like this book is music in that sense, that like the language is almost instinctive. It doesn't work in a directly literal sense. It's almost a painting with the vibe and the feelings.
I'm right there with you. Yeah. It is very visual. And not necessarily like descriptive like Steinbeck or something like that, right? Like 12 pages on a lamppost or something. But no, it is like every situation, every scenario is this, fluid daydream, nightmare, whatever scenario, right? That, it's, and I think that's a challenge too in terms of reading the book, is that you're trying to visualize all this stuff, and some of it easy enough to do and some of it is confusing as hell, but it is all very visual, right? It's not, there's dialogue, sure, but everything is a tableau, essentially in this book, and we're just kind of shifting back and forth through them. So I get that sense of this is like a weird movie essentially, and even though we're reading it or listening to it, it is a visual piece.
Yeah.
You're really seeing it in your brain rather than digesting words.
Even multisensory. Like you almost, there's some chapters where you almost kind of want to go and like wash your hands and wash your face afterwards because you feel like you've just been walking through the dirtiest streets on earth.
The one that hit me a little bit was, we were talking about the guy who taught his asshole to talk, but like how he described the feeling that you get of like the voice of the butthole is like hitting you in your guts, and like, just that like visceral connection of like it, like just hearing it almost makes you want to shit, and like it was just like so, out there, but also like so like such a reaction. Like reading that, I kind of like felt that. I was like, oh like just something, like hitting you in the guts, right? Like I mean, you kind of picture any time in your life where somebody's, dropped a bombshell on you or something, and you've like felt it in the pit of your stomach or something like that, right? And you just kind of like, it's very, very evocative in that way, right? And that's one that stood out for me as like physically reacting to the book, of like feeling it in my gut of like, oh yeah, like that's, and it's just, you kind of like, should I put this book down and like take a shower? Like, like what just happened?
How do I scrub my brain? I feel like I need to scrub my brain.
Yeah.
So that was Naked Lunch.
Yeah. What a wild ride.
Yeah.
There's parts of this book that I still have no idea what happened.
Oh yeah. Large parts.
I just like, I mean, it sounded good and there was weird images and I don't know what really happened there. Which I think is part of the point, right?
I think so, probably.
But I mean, it's fantastic and terrible and wonderful and poetic and dirty and gross and just all sorts of different things all at once.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool. And I can see, going back to why this was something that people wanted to preserve.
Yep.
I didn't maybe understand it in the first half of the book completely. But seeing it as kind of a whole in its, disjumbled glory, and understanding like that this is really the first book of its kind, to be written in this way. I mean, it's definitely, part of the history books, or should be, right?
Yeah. And definitely not for everyone.
No. If you can't read about 1,000 ejaculating cocks and champagne from a baboon cock and lots of cocks, lots of stuff about cocks,
lots
and
of anuses,
queens and
queers
and all sorts of stuff
and all kinds of drugs and Dr. Benway doing weird shit.
And I mean,
toilet plunging somebody's heart.
Yeah.
Who knows what?
If you can't handle simple stuff like that, maybe this book is not for you.
But I mean, if it's short, so if it seems like something you might get a kick out of, I mean, the experience is. Personally, I think I would recommend an audiobook over an actual paper book. I think letting it kind of wash over you as an audio medium might be the best way.
I think as you were talking about the visual aspect to it, I think the audiobook would really help in that sense of just kind of accessing more of that visual channel in your brain, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of right from the ears to the eyes, rather than having to do the whole cognition aspect of reading words from a page. But I mean, it's I think it's worth a read, especially if you've ever read books kind of about drug trips or things like that. I've only read a couple kind of other books that not in this vein exactly, but talking about being on a trip and things that happen and that kind of thing. None of those ever really gave you the feeling of being there in the trip, or any weird feelings, right? They're definitely more clinical, I would say, in approach, or more logistically sound. But this book, you feel like you're in it, right? You feel like you're in that world that you're kind of experiencing. And some of the things, like, really, you feel like you're there. Some of it is a little fantastical, but like you get a sense of what it is like to be on a crazy, weird trip.
And not just a single trip. Like it does feel like you're immersed in this
multiple
for just about the entire book. Whereas I think a lot of books about drug experiences might drift between this is when I'm not high and this is when I am high. This is just you're immersed in the same way that he was probably immersed in it for 15 years. I'll hold off on my ultimate review until we do our wrap up.
I think we should try and figure out the scale. Like, is it going to be droppers or syringes? Or
I think it would have to be droppers over syringes. He only decided to land on syringes at the very end there.
All right.
So come back on September 22nd to listen to us live, breaking down our final thoughts on the book. And we follow that up with the conclusion of our summer of sex, drugs, and rock and roll with
Cocksucker Blues. You've watched
And,
it before, have you? No, you haven't. Okay,
I have not.
right on.
I have not. It's going to be a
Awesome,
fresh watch
yeah,
for
me
me. It is, like I said, available on archive.org if people want to watch before they listen to our episode, so they can follow along with all of the
That's right.
bluesing that we'll be discussing. And that'll be exciting for me because that's actually been on my list of things to watch for a very, very long
it sounds
time.
like a Jack Black song to me.
Does it, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Final cleanup stuff. As always, you can find all of our stuff at blahblahblahmedia.com. Links to Patreon, links to merch, links to social media. And, of course, all the podcasts live there if you want to catch a listen. The podcasts also go out on every podcast platform pretty much under the sun. They're also now on YouTube if you want to go check those out. I think that is about it.
As always, reach out to us with any questions or
shoot us
anything
an
like
email.
that, and we'll try and respond. Or
anything you'd like us to cover. We are inching our way to our 75th episode. So if you have any thoughts on something cool we could do for that, we are certainly open to, doing something kind of celebratory. I do have a plan in mind for when we hit our 100th episode, but we're not going to talk about that quite yet. So thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And hopefully you come back next time.
You really want to miss us dunking pound cake? Come on.
Exactly. We got to find out. We as well as reviewing the book, we'll be reviewing the process of dunking pound cake. Is it all it was made out to be?
Yeah, maybe it's wonderful, or maybe it really is not good at all. We will get to the bottom of it. Yeah,
we will find out. We will get to the bottom of it. Okay. Until next time.
I've been Peter Ammon.
I've been Todd Sullivan.
And go read a fucking book.